Built in 1880, the Denver and Rio Grande Railway instantly became a lifeline for miners, the timber industry, as well as cattle and sheep ranchers throughout the mountain communities of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. Through boom and bust, the railway continued to serve as the only viable means of transport for many mountain communities in both states until the railway's demise in 1969. I'm your host, travel correspondent Tom Wilmer. Please join us in the mountains of New Mexico near the town of Chama, where we climb aboard the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad, the modern reincarnation of the old Denver and Rio Grande. Climb aboard with us and join engineer Tracy Caraway in the cab of the old Baldwin steam engine pulling a load of sightseers across the mountain passes and canyons of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado.
I'm Tracy Caraway. I'm an engineer on the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. We run from Chama, New Mexico to Antonita, Colorado. 64 miles. It's a narrow gauge, steam, coal, hand shoveled. The engines were built in 1925. 4 here. They were shipped from Pennsylvania. You'll travel from 8 to 10,000 foot. A number of tall trestles, a couple of tunnels. You got an hour lunch stop in the middle of nowhere. Excellent meals. The engines are 85 years old. They were built in 1925. The railroad was built 130 years ago.
When it was first built, what was it for?
It used to haul the gold and silver. You could get on in Denver, Colorado and go all the way to Silverton, Colorado. There were gold and silver mines there. They needed some way to transport the minerals themselves to the smelter.
Today there is another line at the other end, isn't there?
Yep. It was all connected at one time, and then an individual bought part of it, and the states bought this, and they split it half and half.
Is there any thought or talk about making a continuous train trip where you connect them again?
Probably not, but it's definitely something everyone should do once.
And are there some steep grades on here? Or
4%, yep.
So you don't want to be spinning out there.
No, it happens sometimes, yeah. It's sure enough, sometimes we'll wake up in the morning, get a light snow, or drizzle from rain, or the leaves falling like they are now, makes the track slippery.
So you bring a little sand along with you?
Yep. There's a sand dome in the front of the engine with a tube runs down to the drivers for traction.
And how long have you been doing this?
I started in 1980.
Wow.
Yep.
So this is your home?
Pretty much. I go away for the winter because we just work from May to October because the snow gets so deep.
So are you a snowbird? You go down south somewhere?
Pretty much. Yeah, I'm from Austin, Texas.
Oh, are you?
And up until May of this year, in the wintertime, I worked for Hummer. And then when China didn't buy them, well, we pretty much all got our walking papers. Mm-hmm. So I hate to see that, but things like that happen.
All right. Well, you're still an engineer.
Yep. Yeah, at least I had something, in the summer.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an honor and a pleasure.
You bet. We appreciate you coming and interviewing.
All right. This is your host, Tom Wilmer, reporting from the mountains of New Mexico. Rich Muth is one of more than 30 volunteer docents who serve aboard the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad throughout the season.
Now, folks, look to your right, where we just came from. You can see the tracks and see the aspen. The aspen color change is somewhat of a movable feast, and it's dependent on light, temperature, and moisture. I have seen the leaves go from green to brown and fall off. The year we had the worst drought in recorded history here, 2002, was the most vibrant and the color lasted the longest. Again, keep in the back of your mind now as we go along. This railroad was built in 1880, utilizing no mechanical equipment. They blasted with black powder. Dynamite had been invented but was not perfected yet. When I talk about no mechanical equipment, you're talking about oxen and scrapers. And then look to your right here. This is my favorite spot on the railroad for aspen. My name is Rich Muth, and I'm a volunteer docent. We like to tell the passengers that docent comes from the French word for blabbermouth. I do this about 35 to 40 times a season. There are about 35 other docents just like me. who do the same thing. We come from all over the U.S. We spend varying amounts of time here. Quite honestly, what we're doing is interpretation for the railroad on the museum side of the railroad.
So let's start from the beginning, the name of the railroad and original name.
The name of the railroad in its current incarnation is the Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad. That is the name that was given to the railroad after it was acquired by the two states, New Mexico and Colorado, which now jointly own this railroad. They have since 1970. The original name for the railroad back in 1880 was the Denver and Rio Grande. That evolved over time to the Denver-Rio Grande Western Railroad, which remained as an extant operating railroad until January of 1969. That's when final abandonment was given to the railroad to abandon this line that we're on right now.
So in the early decades of the 20th century, late 19th century, this was a major arterial supply line, lifeline for many people in two states, correct?
Yes, sir. This actually was the main transportation link in this part of the world. The two towns we're going through right now, or going between right now, are connected by a state highway. That state highway was not paved, nor was it kept open in the wintertime until this railroad ceased operation in 1969. The railroad was originally put in to access the precious metal fields in a very aptly named town called Silverton, Colorado, north of Durango, about 46 miles north of Durango. There was an awful lot of lumber taken out of this area. There are an awful lot of homes in St. Louis and Chicago built with lumber that came from these mountains. A lot of cattle, a lot of sheep. It is still cattle country, not so much sheep anymore, but all the consumer goods that came into this area came on this railroad.
The rolling stock, the engines, for example, is this indigenous to the original line?
The engines themselves, and specifically the one that's pulling us right now and the others we have, were built for the Denver and Rio Grande by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and this particular one was built in 1925 as a narrow gauge locomotive for this railroad. They've been in service for 85 years.
In the rolling stock?
Rolling stock, the passenger stock that we're riding on right now, are actually reproductions of passenger cars, old-time passenger cars. They are actually flat cars. These were built in the 1980s. These are of new vintage.
And your open car, same thing?
The open car is a little bit different. Now, this particular one has got fancy sides on it now, but it is, in actuality, it's an old standard gauge boxcar that was cut down originally. The ends were removed to carry the big oil drilling pipe into the Farmington, New Mexico area. The pipe was too long for the cars, so they had to cut the ends off the cars, put a flat car on either side to allow the pipe to pivot around the curves on this railroad.
And so you put new trucks on them to go
these are some of the original trucks. Yes, sir. Yep. Yes, sir.
So tell us about, as a visitor to northern New Mexico, when can they ride this and how much is it and how long is it?
As far as when you can ride our railroad, our season is typically from the Saturday Memorial Day weekend through the third Sunday in October. For the fares on the railroad, I'm going to have to defer because I don't even know. Nick, you can tell us what the fares are, sir. I honestly don't know.
Nick, what are the fares to ride on the...
Fares start at $75. That is for a half trip. A round trip is what we call it, from either Antonito, Colorado or Chama, New Mexico, just to the lunch stop and return. If you do a full train trip, if you do the full fare, those start at $91 for the adults.
How long does the full ride take?
It's about a 6.5 hour day is what it entails if you do a full trip with us.
And so if you do a half day trip, how do you get back or how do you get up to the train?
If you do a half trip, what we call the round trip, this is when you're just on one mode of transportation, the train. For example, it's from Antonito or Chama to the lunch stop, and then you return by train back to where you originated that morning.
And your full name, Nick?
Nicholas Quintana with the Cumbres Toltec Railroad.
Awesome, thank you. So what is the most endearing and touching thing? I mean, you could be riding your horse today, but here you are. Why do you do this?
Why do I do this? I do this for a couple of reasons. I do it, one, because it's a national treasure. It is something that has to be retained in this country for people to see what it was like in the West, specifically in the railroading West. One of the other reasons I do it, since I spend part of my every month down here, living down here, is that there is so many unique geological and other things in addition to the railroad that are visible from the railroad that I just enjoy sharing it with everybody who comes and rides this railroad.
And to take it a step further, I understand from listening between the cracks in the railroad that without you volunteers, and there's a large cadre of volunteers, this railroad would probably not exist.
Well, that is certainly true, sir, from the perspective of the museum side of it, because that's what our function is. And there are over 2,000 of us. We're called the Friends of the Cumbres and Toltec, from all 50 states and some foreign countries. And we have actually 6 organized work sessions throughout the summer, a week long each, 2 in May, 2 in June, 2 in August. And we deal with preservation, we deal with restoration, and then what my fellow docents and I deal with, which is interpretation for the railroad.
If somebody wanted to ride the train here, where do they catch the train?
Okay, you have a couple of options on where you can board the train. As you know, currently this year, because of a fire on one of our high iron trestles, our western terminus, normal western terminus, Chama, New Mexico, is unavailable. So we have established an interim terminus at the summit of Cumbres Pass, which is about 13 miles, railroad miles, east of Chama.
And nearest big town that somebody would know that hasn't been to New Mexico.
The nearest big town to Chama, New Mexico would be Espanola.
And then
That's on the way to Santa Fe.
So Santa Fe then.
Santa Fe is another big town. Santa Fe is about 2 hours away from Chama. On the other side, on the Antonito side in Colorado, the biggest town of a decent size would be Alamosa, Colorado, which is in the middle of what is known as the San Luis Valley.
And that's kind of in the middle of nowhere too, isn't it?
Is that kind of in the middle of nowhere? Yes, sir, but most of the western slope of Colorado is in the middle of nowhere.
So no matter where you are, it's an 8-hour drive to anywhere.
Yes, sir. It's an hour drive anywhere.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes, sir. But those are the 2 terminuses now. And you have a couple of options, as Nick pointed out before, price-wise. You can start at either end on a train. You may go to the lunch stop. You may go back to your original point. Or you can go to the lunch stop and go across to the other side. Then you take a bus in the afternoon back to your original point. The other options you have are to take a bus in the morning from wherever you are to the other end and just reverse the process.
Then pick your car up at the end where you
Pick your
start.
car back where you left it. Yes, sir.
Very, very good. Okay. For further information, a website.
A website is www.cumbrestoltec.com.
Awesome. Rich, thank you so much. This has
welcome,
been
sir.
great.
My pleasure.
right.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for riding with us.
For further information about the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad, log on to www.cumbrestoltec.org. I'm your host, travel correspondent Tom Wilmer, reporting from northern New Mexico aboard the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad for the award-winning travel show Audiolog, celebrating its 20th season airing over these NPR affiliates. You're listening to KCBX serving San Luis Obispo County, KSBX serving Santa Barbara County, and KNBX serving southern Monterey County. If you'd like to listen to this show or the rest of the travel series featuring northern New Mexico, you may do so anytime on the web as MP3 podcasts. Log on to www.kcbx.org, click on Program Archives at the home page, and then click on Audiolog, the travel show.